Welcome to Chapter 6, Individual Factors, Moral Philosophies and Values. By the end of this chapter, you should be able to clearly and fully understand how moral philosophies and values influence individual and group ethical decision-making in business. You should be able to compare and contrast the teleological, deontological, virtue, and justice perspectives of moral philosophy. Discuss the impact of philosophies on business ethics. Recognize the stages of cognitive moral development and its shortcomings. And introduce white-collar crime as it relates to moral philosophies, values, and corporate culture. Moral philosophy is our specific principles or values that we use to decide what is right or wrong. There are a few theories that are associated with this philosophy. We have our economic value orientation, which is associated with values that are quantified by monetary means. Quantified is our ability to count, to record in numbers. And economically, we're recording those numbers as monetary, as dollars, as pounds, as other monetary instruments. Idealism places special value on ideas and ideals as a product of the mind, while realism is a view that an external world exists that is independent of our individual perceptions. The concepts of goodness, we have monism and pluralist. Monism is characterized by hedonism, which can be quantitative or qualitative, meaning that it can be recorded as data that is numerical, or qualitative, which is by words, which is how we gauge based on our feelings, our intuition, our gut instincts. Pluralists, on the other hand, are non-hedonist. Instrumentalists reject the idea that ends can be separated from the means that produce them. Ends, purposes, or outcomes are intrinsically good in and of themselves. So there are various discussions regarding moral value that revolve around the nature of goodness, and we have two theories tied to that. One is the goodness theories that focuses on the end result of our actions and the goodness or happiness that are created by those actions. Obligation theories emphasize the means and motives of the actions. When we look at consequentialism, it considers an act as morally right or acceptable if it produces the desired result or consequence. So if it does not, then the idea is that then it's not morally right or acceptable. There's some philosophies tied to this, such as egoism, which defines right or acceptable behavior in terms of its consequence for the individual, not for a group, but for an individual. Utilitarianism promotes the belief that one must make decisions that result in the greatest total utility. And of course, there are different types, rule and act, and you'll read more about that in the textbook. On the flip side of that, deontology focuses on the rights of individuals and the intentions associated with the particular behavior rather than the consequence of that behavior. And so this concept, which is quite contemporary, was influenced by philosopher Immanuel Kant. And there are also two types of deontologists, rule and act. When we look at the relativist perspective, the definitions of ethical behavior are derived subjectively from the experiences of individuals as well as groups. And we have three different forms. We have descriptive, metaethical, and normative. And this perspective emphasizes that people's differences, but we also tend to ignore their basic similarities, which can be a recipe for disaster in a sense. Because if we cannot find our basic similarities to see the ways in which we share the same views, or we're on the same page, or we're similar, then we'll be so focused on what's different, what we're against, rather than what we're for. So there's arguments that say that this isn't the healthiest approach to take. When we discuss virtue ethics, it's the argument that ethical behavior will adhere to conventional moral standards. It considers the judgment of a matured person with good moral character in a given situation, and that the virtues that support business transactions are fairness, self-control, empathy, trust, truthfulness, gratitude, learning, moral leadership, and civility. Table 6.3 shows you the various types of justice. Distributive justice is based on evaluation of the outcome or results of a business relationship, and so those are benefits derived, and there's equity and rewards. Procedural justice is based on the processes and activities that produce the outcome or results. And the areas that are emphasized there are decision making, the level of access, our openness, and our participation. Interactional justice is based on relationships and the treatment of others. And thereby, the areas of focus are accuracy of our information, how truthful we are, our level of respect and courtesy during the process. This right here breaks down the moral philosophy and ethical decision making, and you see that moral philosophies used to make personal and work-related decisions vary. And the differences exist in our professional and our private goals and the pressures that are placed upon us. And our individual moral philosophy may change to become more compatible with our work environment. We could initially come in having a certain mindset and belief system and value system, but with the positive or negative peer pressure around us, right? That philosophy can actually be altered minimally or drastically. Kohlberg's model of cognitive moral development, CMD, has several stages: punishment and obedience, individual, instrumental, purpose and exchange, mutual interpersonal expectations, relationships and conformity, social system and conscious maintenance, prior rights, social contract or utility, and universal ethical principles. Level 1 of our ethical concern is that the individual is concerned with their immediate interest, right? We always will think of self first. From there, we will equate the right with conformity to the expectations of good behavior for society as a whole. And then thirdly, we overlook the norms and laws and authority of groups or individuals. These are our three levels of concern that Kohlberg framed. When we discuss white-collar crime in the context and the essence of what makes up white-collar crime, it's anything that's nonviolent, that's committed at a business level, that causes monetary damage and, of course, emotional loss. When you think of the various pyramid schemes that cost people thousands and millions of dollars, when you think of some of the organizations caught up in the financial crisis that we experience, when you think about Bernie Madoff, those are all white-collar crimes. The penalties associated with this crime are fines, home detention. You pay for the cost of prosecution. They may forfeit your property or resources, and there can also be prison time. Figure 6.1 shows you the schemes related to fraud. You see that asset misappropriation is only 57.7%. Asset misappropriation and corruption is 23.3%. Corruption only is 9.8%. When you combine all three categories, is 3.9%. Corruption and financial statement fraud is 0.8%. When you only look at the financial statement fraud alone, it's 1.8%. And if you look at asset misappropriation and financial statement fraud, it represents 2.7% of the schemes. This was reported to the Nations on Occupational Fraud and Abuse through the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners in 2014. Your textbook goes into further detail about the fraud schemes, how they are represented in this diagram, and what it actually says to the business world and to consumers. There's common justifications for this type of crime. Table 6.5 lists 7 of them. Denial of responsibility, because in the mindset is everyone can, with varying degrees of plausibility, point the finger at someone else, right? So you can actually deny full responsibility. You don't take ownership. Denial of injury. The criminals often never meet or interact with those they harmed, right? So they can then be blind to and try to claim that no one was actually injured by what they did. Denial of the victim is where you literally play tit for tat and you claim to be responding to a prior offense inflicted by the victim against you, the offender. So you're now trying to say that somehow you retaliated. This is not because you just pursued them. It's because something they did to you first. Condemnation of the condemners. This is where executives dispute the legitimacy of the laws that they're charged, or they impugn the motives of the prosecutors who enforce them. So they literally go on attack mode and say that the laws are hogwash, that they don't apply to them, that they're made up, that it was a witch hunt kind of thing. They then say the prosecutors are just trying to, get their day in court. They're just trying to work their way up the ladder, so on and so forth. They just will not take ownership for what they've done and that they broke the law. Then the fifth is appeal to a higher authority. I did it for my family. That's usually how it is, right? I didn't want to lose my family. I was looking out for my family. My wife and I were having problems at home, and I just thought she was going to divorce me and take the kids. That, they try to pull on your heartstrings with that nonsense. The sixth thing is that everyone else is doing it. Since it's such a competitive marketplace, there's pressures to perform. And because of that, it may encourage you to break the law. So since everyone else is doing it, what's the big deal if I do it? Well, when everyone else goes to jail, you'll go to jail right along with them. The seventh is entitlement. They just deny the authority of the laws they've broken. They are so self-absorbed and narcissistic that they just feel like they're above the law, that the law and the rules and the regulations don't apply to them. We have various individual factors that you have to always consider. Our values, how our family, religion, and education factor in, rewards for meeting performance goals, And those rewards can also be, like we said, I just mentioned earlier, if there's great pressure to perform and someone's like, at it by any means necessary, you go get that, you close that deal, and you're rewarded for doing so, you're going to seek more rewards. And then, of course, the corporate culture. Um, if the culture is unethical, that's going to factor into you as an individual. It will, you'll have peer pressure to align with the culture. And as I've stated before, culture is always first determined by your senior most leaders, the highest leaders in your organization, your CEO, COO, CFO, everyone at the top dictates the culture that spreads throughout. So as you read through this chapter, pay close attention, reflect on the organizations where you currently work, where you have worked, reflect on some decisions that you've made because everyone else was doing it or because you were trying to look out for the best interests of your family. If there's certain policies and rules and practices that you just think were just trivial and insignificant, so you broke the rules, or it may be someone else within your organization that you know that did it. But consider the likelihood, and you have to be very honest with yourself, of the ability for you to get pulled into an unethical culture and environment where you're more driven by the rewards for meeting goals than you are for doing what's right. With that, if you have any questions, please email me. Thank you.